Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brad Orsini. I have the honor and privilege of serving CSI as the National Security Advisor. Thank you for all coming on today. We have a pretty busy agenda today, so we're going to get right into it. We got some special guests here. Scott Lord, a solutions consultant with the nonprofit Partner Alliance for Safer Schools Pass, and Commissioner Carrie Welt, who is the Vice Chair of Nassau County Fire Commission. So I will introduce them properly in a minute and talk about what they're going to be discussing. But first, what we'd like to do is kick it off with our very own David Pollock, the all-knowing expert of grants in the area and in the country. David, I set you up perfectly here, sir.
All knowing is a challenging title.
It's a good one. It's a good
Thank you,
one.
Brad.
You're welcome.
This month it's easy to be all knowing because we really know so little. And I looked at the slides I had from last month, and they have barely changed. First of all, I just want to highlight in terms of post grants. Um, New York State is getting pickier and pickier. They want to make sure that you've done every step that they require before they reimburse you. And some of it has gotten too slow. We're seeing emails that say it's going to take 30 days or more to get reimbursements. We're trying to work on that end. And we're also developing a reimbursement checklist. So if you've done everything, there are some people here on this webinar who have done this for years and have literally millions of dollars in grant money that they've spent, and they will find that there are more hoops to jump through. We're trying to make sure that you know what hoops you have to jump through, and we're trying to find solutions to every hoop. So that's number one, and stay tuned. We're working on that. Number two, again, with the 2025 Nonprofit Security Grant Program, there's no word in New York. Note that if you're in Connecticut, the due date is December 12th, and if you're outside of New York and Connecticut, you have to go to your own state agencies to find out the deadline. The reality is the deadline is whatever the state says it is, but the federal government, FEMA, has not told the states when they have to pass everything on. So there are two different philosophies by states. Some states, like Connecticut, is saying, look, we want to have applications all in hand. So if DHS and FEMA do finally decide that they want applications, everything can, we can just push a button and send it in. That's what I call preparing for 0-day submission. We don't know when FEMA will say the deadline for submission is. New York, there are federal requirements in the law that set the money aside for an SGP. We don't know if those requirements mean anything. So what we are advising is everyone should have their total application package ready, including they have to be pre-qualified in New York. And there are all kinds of other things that you can find on our website about your requirements. But just have everything ready. It could be that you have a while. It could be that you have 3 days or less. Just make sure you're ready to respond and you can get it in. There's no new money that we know of right now. Governor Hochul announced an additional $14.3 million. That was an announcement of the previous NSGP NSS money, and everyone likes to take credit for that. But there's no new money out there. And then there will be state money. And what I did last month, and I reiterate because I'm more sure than ever that this is what's going to happen. This is the 23-24 grant. I predict that the state is going to do exactly the same thing in 25-26. Note that the opening date was January 25th. Figure that the state is going to put out a grant sometime in January, and they will say that it's going to be a range of money. We know now that there's $35 million allocated in 2025. I am virtually certain what's going to happen is the governor will take the 2025 money, mix it in with another allocation in 2026, and then announce $70 million. So it'll the estimated total program funding will be $35 to $70 million. I don't know what the award ceiling is. Truth be told, no one's made up their mind yet. And the due date is in May. The state doesn't want anyone complaining. You didn't give us enough time. You're going to know about the grant sometime in January and expect the due date sometime in May. You're going to have to apply for the hate crimes grants and the NSGP at the same time. And you're going to have to decide on what to put where. We'll discuss that sometime during the next presentation, next monthly meeting. And that's what I have to shout. And if there are any questions, put it in the chat and we'll try to answer them. Back to Brad.
David, thank you very much. Again, if any questions for David or the security grant program, just please put it in and we will answer them right away. Next on our agenda, we're really going to talk a lot today about fire safety, fire codes, codes on what it looks like and how we respond to an emergency with the fire. So as we're going to talk, we have two great experts today. And just to put this in context, we all know, and our regional directors go out and do training all the time. And we know that fire safety really is that premier way of how we educate on life safety issues. 1959, Scott knows this well, a school fire in Chicago, Illinois, at a Catholic school where over 90 kids perished and a couple staff members. That's 1959. Since there, Fire Public Protection Act, everything that went into protecting us on how to stay safe. What happened? Since 1959, we haven't lost a kid in a school fire since 1959. I think that's still right, Scott. I know you're going to correct me if I'm wrong. But that really, when we think about preparing our community, and we think about everyone in our community knows what we do in a fire. Scott's going to talk about it. Stop, drop, and roll. What do we do in the case of emergency? Run, hide, fight. Whatever that parameter looks like. And so really our experts today are going to hone in on this. And our first speaker today is Scott Lord. Scott has over 25 years of life-saving work in the industry. He holds a bachelor's degree in fire science, and he's a certified ALICE instructor. ALICE is that alert, lockdown, inform, counter, evacuate, active shooter training that he does. He also is very much an expert on specific codes, procedures, policies that keep us safe, and what are we going to do when something bad happens. And with that, Scott, you've been doing this for a long time. You've dedicated your life to this work. Can you tell us, how does that program work with the community, and what can you educate our community on, please, sir?
Absolutely. Thank you, Brad. And I appreciate being invited, and thank you for that introduction. And you're correct. So far, we have not had a student that's been killed by a fire in schools since 1959. And I think that's a lot of the work with PASS. When we talk about the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools, it was developed to kind of provide those guidelines because, Brad, as you mentioned, we have international building codes and we have international fire codes. We have local codes, all of those wrapped around the life safety of the building. How do we build the building to make sure that people can evacuate, or if they need to be able to stay in place and still be safe from the fire threat? And as we all know, our threats today, fire is one that we still take very seriously, but there are other threats that our schools and our communities need to deal with. And part of what PASS came together with is that right now there isn't any international code. There are a lot of sometimes we see state mandates or we see some education type scenarios of trying to do funding to put in technology, but really there's nothing that has a holistic approach to how do we look at security? How do we look at it just like we do with fire and making sure that we have the people and the processes in place and the appropriate technology. And sometimes where we've seen some of these issues comes down to just the door itself. There are a lot of things out there of having these barricade type devices that are put on doors or having additional devices put on the door to lock it from an intruder. And I think one of the things that is very key is just as we talk about fire and how fire safety came together, over the last 70, 80 years is really that's where we are in security. And we want to make sure that as we advance that we do it the right way. And what we have seen is that no matter what our situation is, whether it's in a school, whether it's in a municipal building, a church, a synagogue, whatever it may be in, no one has died from an active shooter event when they were behind a locked door. That's just the fact of where it is. And so when we look at this, there's been some issues over the years on do we trade fire safety as far as being able to evacuate out of the room to being able to make sure that we can't let an intruder in. And the fact of the matter is that we can actually do both. And doing that is actually making sure we've got the appropriate door hardware on doors. As I researched through fire safety, and a large part of it for me was on emergency communications, and that has to do a lot with high rises and things of that sort. The major issue that we have in a fire when we have fire deaths is either the lack of communication or the inability to be able to get out of the building because doors were blocked, because doors weren't secured properly, because doors weren't allowed for us to be able to have free egress. So from the past perspective, when we look at fire and life safety, the number one thing is being able to freely be able to get out of the room. The number two thing is to make sure that when we're in that room, we can be safe if there is an active shooter event. And that is making sure that we have the appropriate locking hardware on that door. And that's where I think our codes really come in and can help us, because a lot of our doors into large public areas or classrooms or things of that sort, those doors are typically fire rated. And so with that fire rating, there's an appropriate hardware that needs to be on that door. That ability for that door to self-close, that ability for that door to be able to lock and close. So making sure that we have the appropriate door hardware is really the first place that we should start so that we can make sure that we have that free egress. We just did a paper that was distributed out that was called Lock, Don't Block, where we partnered with a couple other organizations to kind of talk a little bit more about the barricades, because a lot of the questions that I'm getting now and the incidents that we're starting to hear is the fact that, well, they're able to lock the door from the inside. We can't get into it because of this barricade device that's in there, and we're having assault happening. We're having other things that are happening behind that closed door. And so it's really important that when we look at that security perspective, we absolutely want to make sure that we can stay safe. But just like we do with the fire, it's super important to make sure that we have those strategies and we have the appropriate mechanisms in place. We don't put a fire alarm system in that's going to cause a whole bunch of false alarms and have people that don't react to it. We're not going to put a fire alarm system in that doesn't have the appropriate visual and notification devices to let you know what's going on. So it's the same thing with security. We want to make sure that when we're looking at that threat, that we have the appropriate devices that are on the door and that we don't have other devices on that door that can actually prevent us being able to exit that door. As well as when we're looking at securing ourselves in there, the ability to be able to lock that door from the inside, but the ability to be able to have a key, to be able to have our law enforcement, our EMS, to be able to respond and get to that room appropriately. One of the interesting things that we had found after the tragedy, um, actually up in Oxford, and there was another one in Michigan when we were looking at the after action report where they did tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage of being able to get through doors because they had these barricade devices locked onto them and they couldn't get through the door. There was no way to be able to get into it. And so those are the type of things that we need to look at when we're looking at it from the fire code standpoint, and our AHJs, who some of them have recognized, that the security threat is a threat, and they want to make sure that the people that are in those buildings are safe. They've looked at, can we do this kind of trade-off? But that trade-off really doesn't work. Having the appropriate locking hardware on that door, a door that you can lock from the inside, that anybody can do, that you don't need a key or special knowledge to be able to make it happen, and that door we can always do a free egress. And part of that is super important because, as Brad had kind of alluded to, talking about Alice, the alert, lockdown, inform, counter, and evade, having that options-based solution is one of the things that I really enjoy, especially in the K through 12 market, because it's so geared to that, of doing that training and doing that training from that preschool, elementary level all the way up through a high school, of being able to have that proper training. We talk a lot about it. We talk about fire safety. All of our kids know about, stop, drop, and roll, and, what we're to do when the fire alarm goes off, to line up and to do this. I looked at the average national reports about 7 or 8 years ago when we did fire drills. We pretty much can empty a building. The average is 92 seconds in a fire alarm. So if we can empty a building in 92 seconds, how many kids can we get out of a school if there's an active threat in 90 seconds? What we're saying is most of them. And so being able to have, one, that information, knowing where that threat is, whether or not we're to stay in that location or should we just evacuate, and being able to do so really marries up when we talk about fire code, because it's all about how we can egress and all about how we can evacuate. So as we look at security and as we look at how we secure our buildings, we want to make sure that we have that opportunity to make sure that we can't have people entering that we don't want entering, but everyone has the ability to be able to quickly egress. So with some of the things that we have at passk12.org, you can look that up for some of our white papers. We've got a barricade white paper. We've got 3 or 4 pages that are dedicated in our PASS guideline. And the guideline really is just a holistic approach to look at your technology, your people, your processes, and being able to kind of look at security from that holistic manner. All of that is free to you. So I do encourage you to check out passk12.org and be able to look at everything that's there. And if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to let me know. Back to you, Brad.
Scott, I am going to ask you, and I'm going to put you on the spot today. Can you stay on with us for a little longer?
Absolutely.
I really, we had Mr. Kerry Welt coming on, but I think we had some technical difficulties, and we'd really like to kind of explore this fire safety a little more as well. But I want to go first with, you talked about Alice, that active shooter model that PASS teaches. A lot of our community is not familiar with that, especially in the New York metropolitan area. Can you talk to the group about that active shooter training that Alice does, or run, hide, fight, or avoid, deny, defend? And in your view, are they the same? And do you encourage all our members, obviously, I assume, to take those courses? And can you talk a little bit about the difference in them?
Sure. So, and when we look at run, hide, fight, which I think was first established by the DHS, that was really the first time that we had a program or a training of what it is we're to do. Kind of back to the fire safety, and we talk about stop, drop, and roll, and we're talking about evacuating and talking about touching a door to see if it's hot. Those type of things that we have the ability to do in training, that's what Run, Hide, Fight and Alice and others actually help promote. Because when you really look at it, where did the word lockdown come from? Do you guys know? It was established in the late 70s, early 80s for drive-by shootings in LA. So when we look at lockdown from a standpoint, this was pretty much hide under your desk because people were shooting through the windows. That's not really an appropriate training. One of the things that I really liked about seeing with the Alice training when I first saw it about 15, 16 years ago was that they gave us kind of that extra that ability to actually train and show people how do we respond when we say that we have an active threat. Where is it? Is it inside the building? Is it outside the building? Because depending on what that is depending on what we do, just like with Run, Hide, Fight. You know, the ability to know what are the things that I should be doing in this situation, and frankly, empowering the individuals of what should we do. That's one of the things that we talked a lot about after Sandy Hook was the fact that all of the fear of just hiding in a corner, hiding under a desk, and just waiting for something to happen. And part of that is because we don't have the appropriate training. And things like Alice and Run, Hide, Fight provide that appropriate training. And I think it's very important that we do that. It's mandated that you do fire drills. We all know how to do them. We knew what to do in a fire before we graduated elementary school. We understood what that was. Being in the situations that we're in now, how do we grow that utilizing something like Alice? And with the Alice concepts, that's providing that training, that procedure of when this happens, what is it we're going to do? You know, I don't know how many may be familiar with the standard response protocol by I Love You Guys. That's one of the few ones that are out there that started that really said, let's define what that shelter in place is and what it is we're to do. Let's define what lockdown means. Let's define what this means. And what are the procedures that we have to do that? And so one of the things that I really like about the Alice training is that we really go into in depth, what are the scenarios? What is it we're to do to get familiar with that? So if we're ever in that instance, we're going under instinct. I know that I've got an alarm. I know that somebody said that we've got an intruder in the building. You know, do I have the ability to be able to check to see if it's clear? If it is, I can evacuate. If it's not, where do I go? What do I need to get behind? What do I prepare to do? You know, if that intruder is in the area and possibly might be trying to enter into our area, or if it's one of those open areas, you know, what is it do we do when that happens so that we don't have that freeze mechanism, that it's more of an instinct. Just like the fire alarm goes off, you don't have that instant of panic. You just begin to do what you were trained to do. And that's what Run, Hide, Fight and Alice and others help provide, is giving you what those options are. And really, I can't stress enough on just the training of it. You know, making sure that we make it repetitious.
I want to really focus on a couple things, and especially now we really talked about this advertisement of fire safety and that barricading. And before I get to Mr. Wout, who's on here now, I want to just talk for a second because you really talked about that 90 seconds. Can you explain again? Because what we teach the community is a shooting in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Esteban Ruiz came out. People were standing there. Shot, shot, shot. Walked. Took 70 seconds to go outside and come back in. Who did he see there? The victims that were still laying there. So what we tell our community, how far can you move in 70 seconds, right? Get the hell out of here. So that 90
Mm-hmm.
seconds, and you're talking about that. Could you explain that a little more? And what kind of building are you talking about? Because that seems pretty quick.
Yeah. So when we're talking about 90 seconds, that was the average that NFPA had come up for K through 12 schools. looking at when they did their fire drills with the municipalities that worked with them on what was the average of being able to evacuate the building. And I think one of the important things to look at when we're talking about that is, that ability to have those multiple exits and the multiple ways to be able to get out of the building. Now, obviously, when we're down in New York City, if you're at the top of the building, getting down all those flights of stairs, you're not doing it in 90 seconds. But the fact is I do think it kind of comes back to exactly what you said, Brad, is that when we're talking about the building codes, and as they're formed, one of the reasons why stairwells are the way they are is so that you have that extra time. And just like with security, having that extra time of either having your appropriate door that's locked or being able to give that information to be able to get that time to be able to get out. Because as you said, how far can you get in 70 seconds? You can probably run pretty far. And,
Absolutely.
I think that's one of the things I do like about some of the Alice trainings we do in some of those scenarios is just showing in a populated hallway how hard it is to target some people that are running.
And that's the point. It's hard to hit a moving target, first.
Mm-hmm.
And second, movement is our friend.
Yeah.
Whether it's fire safety, if we can get out safely, or an active
Mm-hmm.
shooter, the same thing.
Yep.
Scott, sir, thank you very much. Thanks for hanging in there for a few additional impromptu questions. And with the time we have left, Carrie, I'd like to move over to you. I introduced you at the beginning, sir. Thank you for joining us. Carrie has been doing this for a long time. He currently serves as the vice chair of Nassau County Fire Commission, and he has been in this field for a long time. He very impressive career, had been recognized with numerous awards, most notably the Nassau County Gold Medal of Honor, multiple Valor Awards. Carrie, I'd like to get right into it. And really, in your personal experience, what are some of the most common fire violations you see in our community, in our schools, in our schools? What does it look like to you?
Somebody alluded to the fact that it's very important to have clear means of egress. And quite often, people use a means of egress, an emergency exit hallway, as a place to store things. Exit doors are supposed to be unobstructed, and it's a good place for people to think that they could store things in front of, because space for storage, space for putting things, even on a temporary basis, is always a problem, especially in a house of worship. So keeping means of egress clear, unobstructed is a very important thing. And also, you should not be storing things that could create an additional hazard in that means of egress. I could tell you that I was once in a school and they thought it was a good idea to store their gasoline cans for their lawnmowers and snow blowers in this emergency exit way. So that is probably one of the worst case scenarios.
Gary, thank you very much. I appreciate the comments on every shul, especially down in the social hall and the egress areas. There's not one I've been into that is sometimes not routinely covered with a lot of stuff. We did that right before the Tree of Life shooting, walked through there and cleared exits out for that very reason. But that was not a fire, that was a shooting. So thank you for that. What are some of the ways an organization can educate? And Scott used the word empower, and that's really important. Empower, make our members and congregants resilient to protect themselves during a fire. What's your advice?
So a lot of things with fire safety are common sense. And unfortunately, the saying that common sense isn't common is quite true throughout all of society. But if you use common sense and don't store things that could start a fire, if you don't start the fire, then you don't have to worry about getting out of the building quickly. I know time was said before by somebody, and fire will double in size about every 30 seconds if it has sufficient fuel and oxygen. And if you're able to breathe there, it has sufficient oxygen. And quite often there's also a lot of potential fuel. So You want to make sure that in the event of a fire, especially knowing there's a fire by having an alarm system, early fire detection system, so we can alert all of the occupants to a fire situation quickly. And when you hear it, quite often people do not move. The fire alarm goes off, the strobes are blinking, the bells are ringing, and the people sit and continue to talk and look. And somebody may comment, "Hey, the fire alarm is going off." We have to get our mindset to when we hear it, that we actually do something about leaving the building.
Muscle memory. Scott talked about that. Exactly. Reacting instinctively. So perfect. Take me to your own temple. What are you adamant about when you're sitting in the pews? What do you expect for fire safety and life saving?
Okay, so throughout my history, I don't like to use real people or real places, so I'm not going to use my temple either. I tell you that my temple is definitely not perfect, but let's just discuss things in general. And we already have spoken about it, and others have spoken about it. Uh, you want to keep means of egress open and clear, and I'm sure if you look through your own temples now, you're going to find that there are doors that would be used as a means of egress in an emergency that are obstructed or may have some type of locking mechanism on it, uh, panic hardware that in some way has been defeated for security purposes, or other things put on the door that will prevent it from being opened in an emergency or rapid means. We have to make sure that our fire protective systems are up to date. Talking about if you have a commercial kitchen, an automatic extinguishing system in the kitchen, fire extinguishers, yes. Fire extinguishers are a double-edged sword. We want to make sure that people are trained to use them. Using them improperly could actually be worse than not using it at all. So training, bring the awareness of the congregants is very important as to what they should be doing in a fire situation, whether they're going to try to fight the fire, which is not really the best idea. The best idea is to get out of the building quickly, call the fire department. So even on Shabbat and holidays, you want to make sure that there are people there that have the capability of summoning emergency service personnel, whether it's the police, the fire, or medical, to the facility. And if we keep our fire protective systems up to date, operational, and we properly react to a fire, that's what would be expected for the safety of the congregation.
Thank you, Kerry. Let's talk a very specific question. What do organizations need to know about actually lighting fires? We have heard, for example, if there's a school that's lighting menorah, is there any actual permits in some jurisdictions that require permits for open flames in some of our institutions?
Usually not for a religious purpose. It's, I guess, the separation of church and state. Even when there are codes that restrict open flame, restrict having large fires, usually for religious purpose, they look the other way. I could tell you when I was in code enforcement around Sukkot, we used to get a lot of complaints for people that were putting up their own sukkah. And I will tell you that they do not meet the building code, and they are considered under the code to be a building. They used to send me out on those complaints, and I would give the people 7 to 10 days to get rid of the sukkah. And I guess you could read between the lines why that was acceptable.
Kerry, finally, what are some general fire safety considerations you think everyone should know? We're here today to talk about organizational safety, but let's talk about at the organization and at home. What should everybody know?
Okay, so we need certain things to have a fire. You need something that's going to burn, you need oxygen, and you need heat. If we take away any one of those, we're not going to have a fire. Well, we can't take away the oxygen because we wouldn't exist. So that leaves the fuel that's going to burn, and that leaves heat. If we can eliminate sources of ignition, eliminate heat, because we're not going to be able to eliminate fuel. Things are made of wood, things are made of plastics and other combustible material. But if we eliminate the heat, the fuel will not burn. Solids do not burn, liquids do not burn, only the vapors they give off burn. So by eliminating the heat, we reduce, in most cases, the production of the vapor. There is a fourth thing also, and that is not allowing the oxygen and the gases of the fuel to chemically unite. And that's the way a lot of effective fire extinguishers work.
Kerry, thank you very much. Very interesting. You didn't hear Scott's presentation, but it dovetailed very nicely on what we need to think through a fire. And what I heard both of you say is really it's important to have good, proper procedures, policies, right? What do we do? It's good for all the congregants to know where all the exits are. And do we train and do we have drills, right, to get that muscle memory when something does happen? And I think sometimes, Kerry and Scott, you said it, we've learned how to react in a fire since we're been in elementary school, right? So sometimes we forget about that as adults and we're so focused on these active shooter drills. But what's more likely to happen in one of our facilities? It's a fire. It's a medical emergency, right? How do we react? And so when those fire lights and alarms are going off, we don't see the people sitting in the seats and we know it happens. So Scott, Kerry, thank you very much for being on with us today. We're going to see if anybody has any questions. If you could stay on with us for about 15 more minutes or so, we really appreciate that. Thank you both.
Sure.
We have some time today, and we want to talk to you about a new initiative that we have that Bill and Dove and a lot of the folks on the team worked on a tabletop exercise. And so before anybody gets frightened of wanting to have a tabletop exercise, Bill's going to explain to you how simple this is. And it's nothing more than a facilitated conversation for your organization. As I encouraged you last month, we hope everybody on this call is going to call us and ask for training in active shooter and stop the bleed. Bill, why don't you give us about your best 5 minutes to 7 minutes? We'll roll this out even more formally in the next month or so. But can you talk to the audience about the tabletop exercise in a box, please?
Sure, and this is really just a teaser for a more in-depth announcement and rollout, but you've had your training, you've signed up for CSI's active threat training, you've learned all about run, hide, fight, or maybe you've participated in our other training programs like the Everyday Security Awareness training. You've developed your policies and procedures internally to your organization. So how do you know what that's going to look like when you try to put it into play? Well, the next logical step in the progression of training is to test those plans and procedures and to exercise that training, because training, it's a perishable skill. If you're not doing it, it's like a muscle. If you don't repeat that training or actually put that training into practice, you're going to forget about it. And when a crisis comes, you may not recall what you need to recall to take swift action. So one way of reinforcing training and testing your policies and procedures is what's known as conducting a tabletop exercise. And like Brad said, it's really just a focused discussion, scenario-based. We have pre-written scenarios where we challenge in a low stress, that doesn't mean no stress, but a low stress environment where you and your key decision makers get together and work through a scenario with a facilitator that's going to prompt you with certain questions. They're going to drop a scenario on you, and along the way, throw you a few curveballs and developments as the scenario plays out. And there are some focused questions that the facilitator will guide you through in order to see if your policies and plans are really appropriate for that type of a scenario. If what's on paper doesn't meet with what reality brings, it gives you an opportunity to learn, to come up with action steps in order to revise your plans and training. And also, it does kind of serve as a training mechanism in and of itself. It takes theory and puts it into practice. So we have, our regional security directors have been trained on how to deliver tabletop exercises. The program has been developed, and it's available for anybody that wants it. We highly recommend that before getting involved in a tabletop exercise that you've done some form of training, either through us or another similar organization, on at least run, hide, fight. Hopefully you also are developing emergency procedures for your building, your facility, and then get with us, register on our website, just like you would for any of our other services, and we'll get together and walk you through the process and deliver a successful tabletop exercise for you. So back over to you, Brad.
Bill, thank you very much, sir. It is a great opportunity for your organization to do this. Go back to your safety and security committees, mull it over with them. It is a good tool for you to use, and I will reiterate for a third time today. Please sign up for the training. It is so very important that you all get trained. We have one question really in the queue, and Carrie or Scott, I'm going to throw it to either of you if you have seen the question. It really has to do about rental properties. And we have this question a lot, whether it's for our grants, whether it's for training. If one of our organizations is in rental space, how can they take control of their own fire safety? Carrie?
So the law says that certain things have to be done. And it's usually the responsibility of the landlord if it's something to do with the structure itself. And it's the responsibility of the occupant if they're doing something improper or not using it correctly. So, how do you take control? If somebody is renting you property and it's something that you need to do, and then not allowing you to do it, then it becomes a very difficult situation, because either you're going to have to make plans to move, or they're going to have to make plans to allow you to do it. And I don't know if I can give a better answer to that question. I don't know if
Thank you,
Scott
Carrie.
has anything he would like to say on it.
Well, it's very well said, Carrie, and I kind of agree. From the building perspective, it's up to the landowner, the person who owns the building, to take care of the fire safety needs per the laws that are there. There are some things in rental spaces to look at, of making sure in your rental space that, do you know where all the fire extinguishers are? Do we have people that are trained to operate the fire extinguishers? I know a lot of times in the rental spaces and some of the communities that I go to is that you have greeters, you have people that welcome, having that staff trained on what happens when the fire alarm goes off. How are we moving people? Making sure that our exits are unblocked, which is something that sometimes can be a challenge, as Carrie has pointed out. Those are the type of things that you can do proactively when you're renting a space. And really, the see something, say something applies. If there's something there that you're concerned with, you get with the person that you're renting the space from and letting them know. And just be proactive from that standpoint.
Scott, Carrie, thank you so much. Let's get on this call next month, and we've mitigated that next threat. That's really our goal, is to stop the next attack. However, if we can't stop the next attack, our job is to mitigate loss of life, right? Through training and drills. But we really need that active intelligence to keep our community safe. So if you see something, say something, do something, get it over to us, and we will help assess that, keep our community as safe as possible. With that, I see no more questions. January 6th is the next date. of our next monthly meeting. And if you have any questions, concern, reach out to us. Keep us busy, folks. Send us those training requests. With that all, thank you very much. Have a great day.